My name's Edan Yago. This is the first time I've been in Warsaw in about 23 years. A lot's changed. The last time I was here to go and visit various sites related to the heritage of my family. So I was here in Warsaw, I was in Krakow, I was in Auschwitz, I was in Treblinka. There was, not that long ago, a very terrible set of events that occurred across the world, and certainly in Poland, that impacted my family personally, and very probably the families, or your families as well. And now, not dissimilar things are occurring again, not far from here in Ukraine. Among my family are some of the only survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And the way that they survived was, before the Nazis entered into Warsaw, they had the foresight to sell everything they owned and turn it into gold and jewels. And then they kept those hidden and it allowed them over time to smuggle themselves, starting with the children, out of the ghetto and eventually get them to either Israel or the United States. The other side of my family was in South Africa at the time. And in South Africa, they also were in concentration camps because they were German. And so the British, who controlled South Africa at the time, placed them into concentration camps. Later, the Polish part of the family met up with the German part of the family in South Africa. And the regime in South Africa became the Apartheid regime, a regime based on racism. And my family, based on their experiences, decided to fight the Apartheid regime and were declared as terrorists because they joined Nelson Mandela's party, the ANC. And so one night I was woken up. I must have been about 8 years old because there was a noise in the middle of the night in the house, and I went down and I saw my grandfather give the keys to his car, to my uncle, because my uncle needed to switch cars so that the police wouldn't stop him as he drove through the night to get to the border with Zimbabwe. And the reason that this had to happen was because my family had received information that they were planning to arrest my uncle and his wife. And after that, it became my responsibility between the ages of 9 and 11 to smuggle gold in the form of Kruger rands out of South Africa. My mother would sew them into my clothes and send me alone to fly to Israel to get the money out to my family. And the reason it was my responsibility was because at the time in Jan Smuts Airport in Johannesburg, they didn't search children. And so it was possible for me to go and get the money out. We've just heard a conversation about Web3, about NFTs, about move to earn. And I think these things are fun, but I also think they're bullshit. I think we are in a world which is becoming increasingly destabilized, increasingly dangerous. I think the one thing that we do need to pay attention to, in the crypto space, I think there's several things that we need to pay attention to, but I think one thing that Lucas made a very good point of raising is the idea of CBDCs, which are effectively a way of introducing total and complete government surveillance of all financial and economic transactions, an attempt to eliminate cash and utilize money rather than as a tool for individual freedom, as a tool for political and government control. And this is just one of multiple different trends. I think, things are accelerating at a rate, and we get used to things so quickly. If 3 years ago, I would stand on the stage and say, listen, guys, I have a conspiracy theory. Governments across the Western world are going to place their citizens in home arrest for 2 years, and everything's going to seem fine to those people. You would have thought I was crazy. But that is what has happened. And we've sort of, just accepted it. if I would tell you that the 9th largest economy in the world would be removed from the SWIFT network and would start transitioning to keeping gold as its primary form of bank reserve, you would have said, what are you talking about? And yet this too has happened. And my sense is that we aren't at the end of the story. We're going to continue to see these types of destabilizing impacts on our world because that is the norm. Throughout human history, that has been the norm. We have lived through a golden period, which has provided, not to everyone, to a minority of people, a high degree of freedom. And we have built out tools like the internet that have provided us with an opportunity to provide freedom to people around the world. But there are countervailing forces. And in fact, the very existence of the internet, of social media, of means of encrypted communication, and now of things like Bitcoin, which also allow for individual sovereign money for people to be able to transact without centralized control or oversight. These things enhance and increase the desire for governments to introduce methods of control across the world, not just China or Russia, but Poland, England, the United States. So I think we are at a very important junction. We created a world by introducing this technology, the internet, which has the promise to create more freedom for individuals than has ever been possible before in human history. But we are also at the same time introducing significant problems. Surveillance is a form of technology which allows for more control than ever before. Introducing that into financial surveillance enhances that effective control. And beyond that, if you look at the internet today, there has not been the growth of freedom that we expected when, in the 90s, the internet was becoming popular. LiveJournal, I don't know if you guys remember LiveJournal, was this breath of fresh air where everyone felt they could be their own publisher. Today, the closest that most people get is their Facebook feed, which is totally controlled by an algorithm and is being manipulated in the most explicit ways. Why has this technology, the internet, not provided the promise of freedom that we expected of it? I would suggest that there's basically one core fundamental reason. We took this 21st century technology, the internet, but we married it to the economic and political sophistication of the Iron Age, of the Bronze Age. We created a set of pharaohs, like Mark Zuckerberg, right? Like Twitter, like Microsoft, that a very small number of companies control the entire internet. And why did this happen? It happened because what has throughout history been the enabler of individual power, individual sovereignty, has been the ability to have a free market and to have property rights. And the internet, and the inventors of the internet, didn't recognize the importance of this. The internet came without any native set of inherent property rights. And so we've got this 21st century technology, but we have the property rights of the pharaohs. And so this has been a major cause of problems in terms of our ability to utilize the internet in the way that we wanted it as a society. Several years ago, I was sitting in the basement of a biology lab in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was a neuroscientist who had started a startup, and we were working on neural networks as a diagnostic tool for various diseases. And because I was working in network science, I came across a paper. And this paper, you guys might know, is called the Satoshi White Paper. And it blew my mind. I destroyed my computer by spilling my coffee cup all over it, and it screwed up my future because I had to change everything. I recognized And I think this is an unusual story. Most people, when they came across the Satoshi white paper, they initially rejected it. I did not. I embraced it immediately. And I think the reason I did was because I was concerned about the lack of property rights on the internet. It was something I was thinking about a lot at the time. And I also had a history as a gold smuggler. So today I want to talk about building a world of Bitcoin, and I will go through this very quickly. There's a huge amount of innovation that is occurring in the crypto space. There's Ethereum, there's Solana, there's BSC, there's Luna, or at least there was. But my sense is that as we've seen this proliferation of more and more of these different projects, it has actually enhanced the differentiation of Bitcoin. Surprisingly enough, as more and more of these competitors have emerged, it has become clear not that they are closer, it's not that they're getting closer and closer to competing with Bitcoin or closer and closer to improving with Bitcoin, but rather it is becoming clearer and clearer that Bitcoin as an asset in this space is totally unique. It remains the bedrock of the entire crypto economy, even though it is not used in many of the other chains. It also is the first entrance point of most people into this space and has vastly more awareness. But the primary differentiation that Bitcoin has goes back to its fundamental roots. It was not designed as a technological tool, but as a political economic tool. It was designed as a tool for the first time to bring property rights, which didn't require middlemen in order to enforce them. And only really Bitcoin has stuck to this path because I think that the people who are building out the other systems are still stuck in the paradigm of trying to build technology companies that will become monopolies. And they think that crypto and Bitcoin is a technology play. It is not. It is a fundamentally social play. We have matured to the point where we can use digital technologies to rewrite the rules of our society. And that's what Bitcoin does. Bitcoin has gone and provided sovereignty on a scalable way, everything from individuals who hold Bitcoin to now 2 different countries that have adopted Bitcoin as legal tender. And in between, we have corporations that have introduced it to their treasuries. We have pension funds who have allocated to Bitcoin. It provides a way of securing your future, guaranteeing your future, which is separate and less impacted by the vicissitudes of global geopolitics and local politics. Now, its price goes up and down, and that will continue to happen for many, many years because there is a very, very steep adoption curve and a high degree of speculation around the adoption curve. But the fundamental properties of Bitcoin have remained unchanged, which is why I frequently refer to it not as software, but as permaware. One of the things that I think has been missing until very recently in the Bitcoin space and has encouraged a lot of sort of copycat projects is the ability to trustlessly eliminate the middlemen, not just from the ability to hold Bitcoin, but the ability to build an entire world of products and services, and most importantly, institutions on Bitcoin. What do I mean? I mean the ability to do DeFi, to trade trustlessly, the ability to create a new type of web, new types of identities, and new types of additional institutions that are trustless, borderless, and permissionless, are accessible to every single person anywhere in the world. We have come to think of our institutions as being managed by the government. Pretty much everything from health to education to military to you name it. We think of that as a government service. This is a recent innovation. It was an innovation that was introduced primarily by the Prussians in order to justify the fact that they could bring 9% of their population into the military. Not necessarily the best way to build a society. We now have an internet as a tool, and if we utilize the thinking behind Bitcoin of having permanent institutional rule sets, which is basically what Bitcoin is. It's an institution, right? Specifically designed around the introduction of money. If we utilize that logic and take it further, we can build institutions that are accessible to people in Poland, to people in Zimbabwe, and can unlock a lot of human potential. The main difference between people who are living in poor places and people who are living in rich places is not their talent, it's their access to good sets, to good, stable rules and the ability to access global trade. Bitcoin and a set of institutions, a world of institutions built on the philosophy of Bitcoin, utilizing Bitcoin as the highest court, provides the opportunity to provide that to the world. For the first time, I think we now have the tools to start expanding the capabilities of Bitcoin to provide this kind of tooling. The kinds of things that Ethereum has been promising and Solana has been promising can now be rooted into the solid foundations of Bitcoin. There are several projects that are working on this in different ways: Lightning Network, Stacks, Nomics. I, for the last year and a half, am working on what has become the fastest growing of these different protocol extensions for Bitcoin, and it's called, I think quite appropriately, Sovryn. I heard about Sovryn about a year and a half ago. I joined the team and have become a core developer in Sovryn, and it is the most exciting thing that I've seen since Bitcoin itself. What Sovryn does is it utilizes Bitcoin and Bitcoin security as a base layer, and then on top of that, it integrates a variety of the new Bitcoin layer 2 technologies that have been in the works for many, many years. But Bitcoin technology tends to be more conservative, and so only really now are becoming available. These include things like Lightning Network, Zk rollups, and sidechains. And what Sovryn does, and what's unique about its approach, is rather than trying to build just one of these, it integrates all of these into a set of tools that developers can then build applications like decentralized exchanges, like decentralized court systems, like decentralized identity systems. And on top of that, as a result, you have an entire ecosystem being built. And so what Sovryn does for Bitcoin is basically extend the capabilities of Bitcoin to provide for everything, an entire world to be built on Bitcoin. For us to reimagine what the institutions of tomorrow could look like, to imagine a world which is not reliant on borders and nation states, and to do so on the bedrock and with the solid foundation of the permaware that is Bitcoin. So where are we so far? This project is quite young. It only launched live and is still in alpha in April. So it's been around for about a year, but it's become the fastest growing part of the Bitcoin ecosystem. There's been, these figures are constantly, the stake is always not up to date because it needs to be updated. But there's to date been over $2.8 billion in trades performed utilizing the Sovryn protocol. There's hundreds of millions of dollars that have been lent and borrowed using the Sovryn protocol. There's thousands of people, now today almost 20,000 individual users who participate in various governance systems for sub-DAOs utilizing Sovryn. And as a result, it has become, to my mind, not just the most exciting part of the Bitcoin ecosystem, but the most exciting part of the crypto ecosystem as a whole. And one of the interesting things that has happened is what we've seen is that a large number of people who are developers, who have been developing on Ethereum or Solana or BSC, and especially now who are developing on Terra, which is what Luna was, have said, we're primarily Bitcoin holders. Most of what we hold is actually Bitcoin, but we really didn't have the tools or the availability to build on Bitcoin. But now we do. And so we've seen within a very, very short period of time, without, the kind of massive backing or, VC funds that operate in other ecosystems, we've seen a massive ecosystem grow around Sovryn. And so I think maybe as a quick comparison to some of the other things in the ecosystem, there's other projects like Stacks that are building a Bitcoin sidechain. There's projects like Ethereum that are the most famous of the smart contract platforms. And then, of course, there's centralized systems as well. Sovryn sits in a different place from all of them. It allows faster development speed, which is Bitcoin native, so you can use Bitcoin as the native asset and as the native form of security. but but we don't expect it ever to see development being as fast as on Ethereum. And I think there's a huge advantage to that. A lot of what is happening on Ethereum is highly experimental, speculative, or worse. And because of the fact that the sovereign community as a whole tends to have a Bitcoin philosophy or mindset, there's far more conservatism around trying to build things which are fundamentally self-sustaining and which are transparent to users. So I don't expect that Sovryn will ever be on sort of like the bleeding edge in the same way that Ethereum is, but it will, because it is released from the limitations of having to deal with regulatory issues like a centralized exchange, and because it has far more capabilities than stacks, it is already the fastest growing part of the Bitcoin ecosystem, and I think we'll likely see over the coming years exponential growth. One of the interesting innovations that was decided by the Sovryn community to introduce early on is that Sovryn has introduced a new type of token, which is secured by the Bitcoin network and is utilized as a governance and coordination mechanism. It is unlike any other token that exists anywhere in the crypto space in two fundamental ways. First, you can do a discounted cash flow analysis on it. In other words, in many ways, it acts like traditional equity. Rather than just being some kind of utility token, it is designed to provide a way to be a stakeholder, to have governance rights in the system, but at the same time to have a very clear stream of revenue from the protocol driven to you. But it is also very different from equity in that you have to be able to participate in an active way, and not just in an active way, but you have to stake your SOV token for a long period of time. The longer you stake, the more of the revenue that you're able to gain. And if you think about the way Bitcoin mining works because it's an expensive activity. You have to participate, you have to buy expensive hardware, and you have to burn electricity on an ongoing basis. You have ongoing OPEX costs. This is different from other consensus mechanisms, which I won't go into now, but most other consensus mechanisms do not have ongoing OPEX costs. And so they're considered to be green. But as a result, they have a huge disadvantage in that the rich get richer and they tend to centralization. Sovryn has utilized a method of creating a governance system, right, which Bitcoin doesn't have. So Sovryn's developers put together a new way of utilizing a token for governance, but which has an ongoing cost. And this ongoing cost is the fact that you need to stake for a long period of time. So it's called proof of commitment, and is unlike any other governance system that we have. It's all about incentive alignment, and this aligns the incentives of the stakeholders in the SOV system with the long-term advantages and benefits or the long-term view of what the Sovryn protocol is designed to do. It's an experiment as well, but it's an experiment in creating good long-term thinking institutions, human institutions that are incentivized to think about our future rather than the next quarter or the next pump and dump. And so I'm glad that I had the opportunity to talk to you here today about Sovryn. If you guys have some questions, I think maybe I have time for 2 minutes of questions. But the basic idea and why I'm excited about this, and maybe this is due to my personal background, is I truly believe that we are entering not unprecedented times, but very precedented times. We're going to continue to experience increased volatility in the world because Pax Americana is ending. And the United States itself has lost its way in many ways. You can see this in the inflation the United States is currently experiencing. The fiat-backed world is both is collapsing at the same time as the idea of borders being a relevant way to govern our lives is collapsing. It sounds like a bad thing. I think it's an extremely exciting opportunity for us to reimagine and recreate human institutions that provide access to everyone, everywhere. Financial sovereignty, global access, and permissionless participation in a world of good institutions which are available effectively for free because they're open source products. It's a very exciting view, to my mind, of what the world could be. And I think it is the world that our children and grandchildren will grow up in if we do our jobs. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Is there time for one or two questions?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, sir, please.
So you mean that you're going to create smart contracts around the Bitcoin blockchain?
That's correct. Not only we're going to, but they already exist. So one of the things that Sovryn brings is the ability to have EVM compatible contracts. EVM compatible means Ethereum style. So you can port anything that has been built for Ethereum or for BSC or Polygon can be ported with great ease to Sovryn, and that's one of the reasons that it's growing so quickly.
So Sovryn is kind of Ethereum for Bitcoin.
Yes. So in a way, it provides the functionality, or it extends the functionality of Bitcoin to include also the functionality of Ethereum. But with a very important caveat, Ethereum has no self-regulatory mechanism. So for example, what used to be a decentralized stablecoin, DAI, if you're familiar, right, is now 52% centralized USDC. That is unavoidable in an ecosystem like Ethereum, but in Sovryn, the system is designed to actually allow the community to create rules which avoid such situations.
Sorry, we must finish.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.